Hello everybody, welcome back to my 2022 series about burial rites in preparation for the QCAA external exam. Today I'm going to be looking at the concept of isolation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you to pause this video and spend 15 minutes planning a response, and then come back and we can go over the concept together and see what we can come up with. So the essay question here says, what comment does Kent make through the representation of isolation in burial rites? And we know that what we have to do is identify our cognitive verb. And as is what happens a lot of the time, we aren't actually given a cognitive verb. So we can write analyze, because we know that that is what we're going to do because it's an analytical exam. The next thing that we want to do is we want to circle what it is that the author is doing. So in this instance, we know that it is a comment that Hannah Kent is making. Finally, we're going to underline the subject, so what the exam is actually going to be about and what my essay should focus on. So we've got the representation of isolation. Okay, so that is what this question is looking at. Now, in order to make sure that I am ready to start to plan a response, I need to make sure that I understand all of the question. So when I'm going through here, I'm going to look at the word comment and what this means. So I'm thinking like speak to, or like says about, or even like commentary really is another way to look at it. Does Kent, we know that this is our author. I'm going to write this here because I want to make sure that I am using that kind of language. Through the representation, so this is how the concept is shown, or how it is presented. And then I've got isolation, so I'm going to unpack what isolation means. Now, when I think of the word isolation, I instantly think of something that I love to do, and you all know that I love to do in responses, is looking at it in like a literal or a metaphoric, or perhaps in a physical or an emotional kind of a way, because there are two very different types of isolation that exist within the text. So whilst it means alone, I instantly think about the fact that it means alone physically, but also socially in this context. And of course, I know the Burial Rites is my novel. Hopefully we all know that one by now. So now that I've done this and I've made sure that I have unpacked my question, I want to start thinking about the concept so that I am able to deduce exactly what the comment that Kent is making. So I'm going to do a little bit of a brainstorm about isolation and see what I can come up with. Now, because I've already looked at the fact that there is a physical and a social element to isolation in burial rites, I'm going to split my analysis up into that because I just think that that's what's going to help me. I want to think about how I came to this conclusion. What is it about isolation that made me think about it being split in those ways? So I'm going to brainstorm really loosely just to get my ideas out on the page. So when it comes to social isolation, obviously I think about Agnes, but I think about other characters that are socially isolated as well. So I'm going to list the characters that I think deal with some of this. So I've got Stainer, Toti, and Lauga. So all three of these characters are isolated to some extent. Now, after I've been able to deduce that these characters are isolated in a social kind of manner, I want to think about why. Why do I know that? How do I know that? And what does that tell me about the text? So when it comes to Lauga, the fact that she is the last one to accept Agnes really isolates her towards the end of the text. Now, I want to have a think about how I know that. What helped me come to that conclusion? What evidence could I use to support this? And I'm reminded of that part about in the middle of the text when there is a little bit of a disagreement between Lauga and the members of her family, and she says, I am the only one who sees her for who she is. And I think that that's a really good quote that shows that she feels like she has been isolated because of this. Just in case you wanted to know where that is in your novel, it is on page 209. However, as you know, you don't need to know your page numbers for the exam. Now, when it comes to Toady, the reason why I think that he is isolated in a social capacity is because of the fact that he lacks his father's approval. And this is something that we see quite a lot through his interactions with his father. Now, with Stainer, it is the fact that she is unlike the rest of her family, and she speaks on that a little bit, but also we see that represented in her actions, okay? Whether it's the way that the dirt, whether it's the way that it is described that she has dirt under her fingernails, or the fact that she doesn't seem too interested in getting married, adhering to the social expectations that are placed on her. That's somewhat isolating, and perhaps that's why she latches on to Agnes in the way that she does. Now, of course, there is also Agnes, okay? So I am going to spend a little bit more time looking at Agnes as she is the protagonist of the novel, and there's going to be a lot more that I can analyze in terms of her, especially when it comes to isolation. If you get anything, I'm going to break it down in terms of the different places that Agnes lived in her life, because I believe that these represent different stages of her journey. So of course, I've got Cornsa, I've got Storyborg, and I've got Ilagusta. These are the three main locations that we see Agnes in throughout her life. When I am looking at Cornsa, of course there is the fact that the family exclude her. And I don't know if exclude is the right word, but obviously they have negative opinions towards her. We see this initially, okay? So I want to make a note of that because it's not the whole way through. When it comes to Storyborg, she is quite literally locked up alone. Then when it comes to Ilagusta, that's a really interesting one to look at because there are other people around her, but she doesn't really have anybody. Now, I'm going to jump to the literal isolation that exists. So the physical isolation in the novel, and the Icelandic landscape lends itself to this in many, many different ways. So of course, the farms in Iceland are a big part of this because they are so separated from one another. Now this led to Inga's death because if she, well, obviously there was no help that was available for her because of their location. And if I'm going to expand on that, I can talk about the weather. Finally, when I'm looking at the farms, I'm going to look at Ilagusta, okay? Because Ilagusta is a very isolating place. Now, I came up with a quote for my first point, but I want to go back now and add some more quotes because I found like I was on a little bit more of a roll with my ideas, and I didn't want to stop. And I didn't want to stop to add in quotes. Now, when it comes to Ilagusta, I am reminded of the quote that says, "Nathan lured me to his lonely farm with a lie." And again, we don't need to know our page numbers for the exam, but that is page 260. Agnes also refers to the location as cramped quarters, and she also uses the word isolation to describe the farm. When Agnes, at the very beginning in the prologue, is describing her time at Storyborg, she says it wasn't always so cold, and that's a really good quote to look at the weather, but also her time in Storyborg. Now, when Agnes was in Ilagusta, she also said that there was nowhere else to go. Back over to the social side of things. When I'm looking at Toady and the fact that his father, he lacks approval from his father, I'm reminded of when his dad says to him that Agnes is not worth the time that he gives her. Agnes is at Storyboard. She says, waiting in darkness in silence. That Agnes is excluded from the family. I want to think about the way that Margaret addresses her initially. So she does call her the B word, that I again am not going to say because I don't want to get demonetized. And when she says, keep that bleep away from the knives or something of the sort, that really shows that she is not excluded there. We also see many other examples of the way that other family members refer to Agnes when she first gets there. Mainly Margaret, but others as well. So, what sort of a woman kills men? Just so perplexed by the way in which Agnes carries herself. Now, when it comes to Ilaugusta, obviously we have said here that obviously these quotes here are going to help with this one here. So Ilaugusta represents both social and physical isolation. When I look at Stainer, I look at the fact that when Agnes asks her why she asks her so many questions, she says, because you always give me answers, which implies that that doesn't happen for other people. Now that I've got some quotes on here, I want to start thinking about other aspects of the novel that I want to include in my analysis. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to identify other concepts, I'm going to identify aesthetic features and stylistic devices, and I'm going to identify some cultural assumptions so that I can start to make some connections and find some commonalities between my ideas. Time you give her, that's going to definitely be dialogue. When it comes to Lauga being the last family member to accept Agnes, I'm the only one who sees her for who she is. That is, again, that's going to be dialogue, but it's also going to be characterization. When it comes to Stainer, because you always give me answers, again, that one is going to be dialogue. Agnes and her social exclusion. So Cornser family exclude her initially. So we've got a couple of examples here. So we've got lexical choice. I'm just going to get all the way down here. We've got lexical choice, and we also have juxtaposition because these two examples of the way that Agnes is referred to by Margaret really contrast with how she refers to Agnes at the end of the text. When we look at the fact that Agnes says she's waiting in darkness in silence, what we have here is narrative viewpoint, but I would also refer to this as imagery and symbolism. The next step is to find connections between my ideas because I want to start to be able to build a thesis statement. So if I look here, when I look at all of this, I can see that social isolation and physical isolation connect to each other a lot. And I definitely see that through Ilaugusta, but I can see that both are devastating, right? So perhaps the comment that Kent is making is that both physical and social isolation have devastating outcomes. How I can say, like, when based around societal norms. When fueled by societal norms, let's see how that goes. Alright, so this thesis statement says, when isolation occurs because of societal norms, the outcomes are always devastating, regardless of whether one is socially or physically excluded. Do you think that that's the comment that Kent is making? Do you think that Kent is making this commentary through burial rites? Because I kind of do. I'm going to roll with it. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my points and see what I could use. Could I look at, I almost want to break it up into cultural assumptions. Because if I'm looking at social norms, I could look at those based on class, gender. What I could do is if I'm looking at class, I can very much look at the physical exclusion that occurs because of class, right? So I could look at the fact that that is Ilaugusta, right? I don't know if that's going to work. What I could do is I could look at it within other concepts. So I could look at like belonging. I could look at survival, and then I could look at humanity? There are a lot of options here. Your job now is to take this brainstorming or your brainstorming, and I want you to come up with your own thesis statement and your own essay plan. And maybe if you're feeling particularly motivated, you could even write an essay on this. This would be one of my favorite topics to get in the exam. I really love looking at isolation, and I would love a question that is like, to what extent is mental isolation more impactful than physical isolation in burial rites, or something like that. And I would love to look at, you know, which type of isolation is more harmful for Agnes, because I don't know what I would say. I think I could argue either side, and that makes it really exciting. So that's I think that might be my dream question, although I've said that a few times. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that your studying is going brilliantly. As always, please make sure that you reach out if you need anything and everything. Send me all of your practices. Anything is worth getting feedback on, and I will see you all very soon. Goodbye.